right, good morning, Westside. Well, hey, the hook of this series is kind of interesting to me. It assumes that everyone wants to get better, that everyone wants to live a better life than the one that they're already living. And I think that's probably generally true, right? And I bet if I asked you, hey, do you want to get better? You want to live a better life? You're probably going to politely respond, yeah, of course. Yeah, I want to get better. But internally, I bet that if you're honest with me, there's a little bit of hesitation there, because deep down you know that getting better is going to require something of you. And so your more honest internal response to the question is actually, maybe it depends. What's it going to cost me to get better? Well, what if I told you that it's not going to cost you anything that you're not going to get back in some better, fuller, more complete form? Would you believe me? Would you trust me in that? Let's talk about work. Work. You spend a large percentage of your life working, don't you? I mean, you're working to pay the bills, chores around the house. Shoot, when you're my age, it's work to get out of bed, right? I mean, even on the other end of the spectrum, if you're a kid, you're working at your sport, you're working at piano, you're working at math, work. And our relationship with work is complicated these days, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, our culture has for a long time had this tendency to make too much of work, make work into an idol. Workaholism has been in our water for a while. Our systems have encouraged hard work and productivity, as they should, but they've also unintentionally incentivized overwork and an obsession with productivity, right? Perhaps even you have become a sucker for the lie that says the more you produce, the more you do, the more valuable you are. And you've believed that. And so you're always working, you're trying to prove yourself, you're always producing, hustling for self-worth, as they say. But it's complicated because, even as busy as we are, as scheduled as we are, we so often avoid and procrastinate the work that we would rather not do. And we got plenty of things to keep us busy. So we can often look and actually genuinely be incredibly busy, all while avoiding our most uncomfortable and often most important tasks on our list. The last 20 years of technological advancements have no doubt softened us as a culture. I mean, they've gotten us so accustomed to there being an easier way to do things. So I think we're forgetting how to grind out a project. What we define today as hard work just isn't what it used to be. Last couple of years, a huge percentage of people quit their jobs, causing what they call a great resignation trend, contributing, of course, to worker shortages. So that's a thing. And maybe it's no surprise that quiet quitting is also a thing these days. Are you familiar with this? That's when a person doesn't officially resign from their job, and they keep it, but they do the bare minimum of what's expected of them, right? So they're not going the extra mile for the employer or the workplace. They're just doing the minimum in order to keep the job. This is not a good thing, obviously, but it's probably in reaction to workaholism, which is also not a good thing. It's probably a quiet protest against a work culture that has prioritized productivity over one's personal, mental, emotional health. Our relationship with work and rest, it's complicated. I can't tell if we're bad at working or bad at resting or both. It could be both that we're bad at. Here's something that's true. We are created for both work and rest. In the Judeo-Christian story, both work and rest are great things. They are good gifts given to us by our Creator. When you look at the first few chapters of the Bible, work is there in the beginning. Before sin enters the picture, work is there. Work's good. Humans were designed to use their minds and their bodies to work the earth, work the garden. It was only after sin entered the picture that work became a struggle, a toil for us, and rest became elusive. Work and rest are good, and we're designed for them. Our bodies are clearly designed to grow stronger through this combination, this rhythm of work and rest. When you work a muscle, when you expose it to resistance and challenge, what that muscle does is it says, uh-oh, hey, and it announces to your body, hey, I'm needing some help over here. I can't do this unless you grow me. Body, please make me bigger. And then the body, in times of rest, when the muscle is at rest, the body sends the necessary attention and reinforcements to that muscle, providing all the ingredients that build new cellular tissues. Your muscles actually do their growing when they are resting. And of course, without times of exertion, without the exposure to resistance and challenge, our muscles don't grow in times of rest. They actually work backwards. They begin to disappear. They atrophy. They waste away from lack of use, lack of challenge. Rest actually becomes regressive when there's no exertion, when there's no work. Now, this might be old news to you, but it seems rather profound to me that our muscles grow after times of exertion and during times of rest. Not during the exertion, but after it, when we're resting. That's when we grow. It's true at a cellular level. It's true at a physiological level. What if it's true at a spiritual level? What if you don't actually grow in moments of exertion and challenge and effort, but rather in those quieter, more reflective moments after you've exerted your energy? In your moments of rest. What if that's when your soul actually moves forward? What if it's not in your productivity that you advance, but in your rest? Wouldn't that be something? Healthy growth requires a proper rhythm of work and rest. You know this, we all know this, but what is that proper rhythm? Is it 16 hours of activity plus 8 hours of sleep? 12 hours of sleep, maybe? Is it 5 days on, 2 days off? Half the year vacation, half the year on? Like, what is the proper rhythm? Who is the authority on the optimal work-rest rhythm for human beings? Well, the Israelites, who were later called Jews, had woven into the fabric of their culture this countercultural rhythm of work and rest. We're picking up the story when they had just been born out of Egyptian slavery. They are just beginning to toddle around in the wilderness. And this God who rescued them is officially introducing himself to them. Hello, my name is Yahweh. And he's laying out some basic foundational expectations for how he wants them to live as his people. And these expectations are coming to them in the form of 10 big commandments. You probably know some of these 10. Don't worship other gods before Yahweh. Don't make any idols. Don't murder. Don't steal. And there in the middle of this list is the command to rest, to observe a Sabbath day. Sabbath is a word that comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, which means cease and desist your activity. It means, Sabbath means to stop activity. Now, before we look at this commandment in the text, I want you to keep this in mind, that these Israelites have just been slaves in Egypt. This is a people group whose national identity thus far has been defined by work and productivity, working like dogs 7 days a week without respite. They were a nation of slaves to a Pharaoh who believed he was a god, and he used what he believed was divine power and authority to exploit their energy for his own gain. And now, stepping into the picture here is this Yahweh God, clearly more powerful than all the gods of Egypt, And he's introducing himself not as a slave-driving, exploitative kind of God, but rather as the kind of God who wants his people to rest. He wants it so much that he commands it. You must rest. Stop working every seventh day. Fourth commandment, this is how he says it. It says, remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Holy meaning distinct, unique, set apart from all the others in a way that reflects God's uniqueness, his set apartness. He says you have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest, dedicated to the Lord your God. It's dedicated. You recognize it as something that belongs to him. It says, on that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons, your daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. It's a total shutdown, right? Nobody is working. Why? Well, here's the rationale. He says, for in 6 days, the Lord made the heavens. He made everything, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day, he rested. And that's why, that's how the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. See, this goes all the way back to the very beginning of the world. By resting after 6 days of work, God wove rest into the fabric of this universe, into the fabric of time itself. Now, regardless of how you relate to these 10 commandments, you got to admit that God's command to rest is apparently a pretty serious command. I mean, it's on the big list of 10, right? It's on the same list as don't worship other gods, don't murder, for goodness sake. I mean, that should get anyone's attention. And when you compare this, number 4 commandment, this command to rest, with the other commandments on the list, this one actually has the most words, the most explanation. By word count, this command alone is a third. It's 33% of the total words that make up the 10 commandments. Add to that the fact that if you were an Israelite, working on the Sabbath day was punishable by death. Capital punishment. A little later in Exodus, God says to Moses, Moses, tell the Israelites, you must keep the Sabbath day, for it is a holy day for you. Anyone who desecrates it must be put to death. Anyone who works on that day will be cut off from the community. Notice that cut off is not just cut off from life, but cut off from what it means to be an Israelite. Cut off from this community who organizes its whole identity and way of life around this holy rest day. God is apparently pretty serious about this Sabbath business. Don't you agree? It appears that God intended for this regular rest to be one of his distinctive marks of his people. One of the ways he expected them to live differently from the people around them. Now, we could no doubt get into a rousing discussion of whether or not Christians are under the 10 Commandments, under their authority, and whether or not, we're expected to obey the 10 Commands as if they are commands for us today, not just for the ancient Israelites and Jews. And in that, we would be sure to discuss whether or not Jesus, by fulfilling the whole law in his life and ministry, frees us from the whole law, which includes the 10 Commandments. And I'm telling you, it would be a fascinating discussion and an important conversation for sure. But it would actually also be a little bit beside the point. Because this commandment for Israelites isn't just in the law. He's not coming and bringing this out of nowhere. It's grounded in this thing that happened, this principle that long predates God's law for Israel. I mean, do you remember? Back in the first chapter of the Bible, God's creating everything. He's speaking everything into existence. He says, let there be light and land and goldfish and puppy dogs and humans, male and female. And he creates everything in 6 days. But he wasn't finished yet, was he? It says, on the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. It's a curious thing here that God blessed the seventh day, because this is actually the third time in this creation story that God is said to have blessed something. Check this out. After God has filled the sky and the sea with creatures, it says, then God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply. And after God creates male and female in his image, a little bit later, it says, then God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. His blessing thus far has led to the multiplication of things, the fruitfulness of things. And in step with that, here, after God rested on the seventh day, it says God blessed the seventh day. He blesses a day. What might it mean for him to bless time? Listen, I'm not saying that God is going to multiply your days if you make a point to keep the Sabbath. I don't think the Bible is teaching that here. But for a guy who has said countless times, man, I sure wish there were 36 hours in a day, knowing full well that if I had the extra 12, I would just extend the problem. I'd just cram more frenetic activity and work into whatever extra margin you give me. So I must admit, this potentially multiplicative blessing has gotten my attention at this point. And I can't help but entertain this thought experiment. If God told me directly that he would multiply my time if I devoted unto him a seventh of my time by resting, would I believe him? Would I trust him in that? What would it look like for you to give one day of your week to God by resting? For you to set apart one day a week by abstaining from work? What if instead of letting some idolized version of work dominate your 7 days, and also instead of letting some lame version of work seep in to all 7 of your days, what if you limited yourself to only working 6 days a week, very intentionally abstaining from work on your 7th day? And what if, instead of letting some insipid cocktail of lethargy and distraction and entertainment seep in to your work throughout the whole week, what if you got serious about resting hard one day a week, very intentionally giving that rest day to God before going back to work, working hard for his sake 6 days a week? What might that do in your life? Perhaps you've read or listened to or talked with Christians who do this, who regularly practice a Sabbath day. You'll notice that they swear by it. They rely on it. They depend on it as if it is something that not only gets their work-rest rhythm back into balance, but something that puts their whole lives and egos back into proper perspective, gets their hearts believing the right things. They claim that it exposes and weeds out lies in their lives, replacing them with truths. Truths such as, I am valuable, not because of what I do, not because of what I produce, but I'm valuable simply because I am known and loved by God. Or truths like, I have limits, and that's okay. I have no meaningful control over this world, and that's okay. In the whole scheme of things, I am really not that important, and that's okay. This world doesn't actually depend on me. It doesn't revolve around me and my schedule. I am not here on planet Earth because I am needed. I am simply loved, and that is why I am here. That is why I exist. When you're grounded in those truths and those realizations, work and rest become a joy. These folk will tell you that a Sabbath day is not a distraction from your work. Don't think of it like that. It's a day when the purpose of your work gets refreshed and regrounded in God's purposes and His will. It's not simply a day off from your Monday through Friday job. It's not a day when you're trying to catch up on all the things that you weren't disciplined enough to complete or disciplined enough to say no to on the other 6 days of your week. No, it's a day devoted to God, given to Him as the creator of all good things. You don't practice a Sabbath for the purpose of increasing the productivity of your 6 days, though that does tend to be a happy byproduct. But no, you practice this, you do it in hopes that God might smash the idol of productivity in your life. It's not a day of isolation and solitude, though you might include some of that. It's a communal day, intended to be shared and enjoyed with others who have set aside the day for God's purposes. Shared with others whom God has designed to reflect Himself into our lives. It's not an escape from the real world. It's a slowing down to savor, to revel in, and enjoy the world God has created. It's not a day of sitting around reading your Bible all day, though reading Scripture is probably not a bad idea on your Sabbath. It's like my old preacher used to say, it's a day of praying and playing. Praying in the sense of last week's sermon, which if you missed it, you got to hear it. Sermon on gratitude. It's praying in the sense of these countless thank you prayers offered to God. God, thank you for this cup of hot coffee in my hands. Thank you for the sunshine. Thank you for light and color and shape and texture. Thank you for the softness of my pillow. Thank you for ice cream. Amen. I got an amen. Thank you that this world does not depend on me. It's a day of praying and playing. Playing in the sense of unproductive fun with others, where you're not producing something, you're not achieving something. It's games that don't matter. Like a kid bouncing on a trampoline, bouncing and giggling, not producing anything but smiles. A whimsical celebration and enjoyment of the good things God has woven through His creation. It's a participation in that. They say that you start by nailing down a day that works best for you, whatever that is. Traditionally, it's the 24-hour period from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday, but it really doesn't matter what day of the week it falls on. Sundays wouldn't work for me because it's a work day. Might work for you. A preparation day is key. If you're going to do it right, you got to have some time to prepare for it, the day leading up to your Sabbath. You're not just getting stuff done, but you're preparing things like food and whatever else you can prepare so that you're doing as little work as possible on your Sabbath. Some light a candle to mark the beginning of their Sabbath, the light being a reminder that God is present. A lot of people incorporate pleasure stacking. That should get an amen too. I mean, that sounds great, doesn't it? Where you're saving special activities and foods and treats, special toys for the kids. You're saving them to be enjoyed only on the Sabbath, making that day even sweeter, chalking it full of sensory delights, all as reminders that we have a good Father who gives good things to His kids. If you're married, make some love. If you got kids, play their games. If you got a dog, take that thing for a walk. If you'd like and benefit from a nap, take a nap. Totally guilt-free. What about TV? What about on-screen entertainment? Can I watch something? I'm sure there are some good ways of doing this in moderation, but you've probably noticed by now that you rarely feel refreshed after mindlessly scrolling on a screen or binge watching a series, right? Entertainment just doesn't recharge or restore our souls very effectively. Maybe you've noticed that we often use entertainment to fill space that would otherwise be sacred space in our lives. Entertainment tends, not always, but it tends to numb rather than heighten our awareness of the sacred, which of course, conflicts with the whole purpose of the Sabbath, so be mindful. What do I do with my phone? No one's actually asking that question. You already know what to do with your phone, right? Like you already know. You turn that thing off. You hide it for the day. Why? So you can be fully present in the moment that God has made possible right in front of you. Fully present with those people who are reflecting God into your world right before your eyes. Now, perhaps you've noticed that I've not actually been sharing with you from my experience, but rather from the experience of others, relaying that to you. As silly as it might seem to you, I suppose I have put this whole Sabbath thing in what Ruth Haley Barton calls the too hard category. Do you have that category? You know what I'm talking about? I'm sure it's an awesome practice, but it's just too hard for me to actually implement in my life right now. Maybe I've put it in that category. Maybe I put it in the category of practices that super spiritual people do, and I am not that, so, it must not be for me. But I'm starting to question all of that. What if this, like anything, just takes some practice, a little bit of trial and error, and then it actually turns out to be incredibly easy? Goodness gracious, it's a stopping after all. It's an opting out. It is a surrender, a letting go. How hard could it be? I'm starting to wonder if it's not in the too hard category. It's not in the super spiritual category. What if it's not a Christian thing, not a Jewish thing? What if it's just a basic human thing that is so completely basic to human existence and flourishing, so basic to how God wired us up to function in this world and in time itself? The way I've been talking about this up to about now has probably sounded like it's got like a moral force to it, like you ought to practice that. You should practice the Sabbath. There's an ought and a should driving this whole thing. I want to be clear. I don't think keeping or not keeping a regular Sabbath is a sin issue for Christians. Jesus is our Sabbath rest. He's it for us. And he is the only way that we can someday step into this eternal Sabbath rest. So it's not a sin issue for Christians. It's a wisdom issue, I think. Wisdom being always a gentle invitation, never an arm-bending compulsion, always a gentle invitation into a better way of living in sync with this universe that God created. And that said, if I'm honest with myself, wrestling with this issue, to practice or not practice the Sabbath regularly, by wrestling with that, it does seem to expose areas of sin in my life and in my heart. For me, this Sabbath thing is a really hard step for me. Maybe it's hard because I like too much the feeling of importance that goes along with being busy, productive. Maybe because I've got too much of my self-identity and ego and self-worth wrapped up in what I do, what I produce. Maybe it's just hard for me to say no to opportunities that come my way or my kids' ways. I just really like saying yes and trying to do it all because I think that that's the way to fullness in doing it all. Might be hard just maybe because I'm too concerned with my image, maybe. Too dedicated to making sure you don't think I'm lazy. I don't want you ever thinking that about me. Could be that. Might be just simply because my relationship with work and my relationship with rest is just jacked up. It's out of whack. Any of those could be true. All of those, I think, are probably true at some level. But if you really want to get to my root issue, the primary obstacle that's standing between my life right now and setting aside one day of rest to God, it's about trust. I don't yet fully trust God with my time. That sound crazy to you? Money? I think I've learned to trust him with my money for the most part. I'm not arrived yet, don't get me wrong. I haven't arrived, but I'm on the right road, heading in the right direction. My image, for the most part, I care a little bit about what you think about me, but for the most part, I trust him with my image, my reputation. Whether he's got me looking like a sage or looking like a fool, I can be content. I trust him to use either of those for his higher purposes. My circumstances, I think I've learned to trust him with my circumstances, good or bad, in times of plenty, in times of need. I think I've at least started learning those lessons. But my time, do I really trust him with my time? With these few precious moments of life that I got left? Time with my kids, time checking items off my bucket list, that long list of things I got to do around my house that I want to get done on my house, that long list of things I want to do that I'm convinced will gain my life a sense of fullness. My time. It's the most valuable resource I know of. Can I really trust him with it? What do you think? Can I trust God with my time? It's a silly question, isn't it? When I say it that way, it sounds so silly. Because if the first chapter of the Bible is true, if it's only partially true, and God created all this, it's not my time. It's a silly question. It's all his anyway. He's just letting me step into it. My hunch is that if I were actually to give to God a seventh of my week by resting, my hunch is he wouldn't multiply the hours of my day. I don't actually think he would multiply my time, but I do think he'd bless it. Maybe by slowing it down, maybe by deepening it or expanding it through gratitude. Maybe simply by growing the parts of me that have actually done his work. Church, I do look forward to the day when I am practicing what I've been preaching to you today. When I've actually learned to entrust my time to God. Actually learned to see my moments every hour, every day that I'm responsible for as already belonging to him, not mine. I bet if you catch me on that day, I bet you'll notice a difference in my work. I bet it'll be more quality work. And I bet you'll see it in my rest. It'll be a higher quality rest. And I bet I'll be living a better life. You believe that?